Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Twilight Zone review. Today it is Season 3, Episode 26, Little Girl Lost, written by Richard Matheson, and starring Charles Aidman as Bill, Robert Sampson as Chris Miller, and Sarah Marshall as Ruth Miller. And Richard Matheson has once again written a very interesting concept that comes across as very thought-provoking, and this is a very unique episode, which I consider to be very, very good. Unfortunately, there's a few things that keep it from being one of the all-time great episodes, which I will talk about as I discuss the episode, but it's certainly excellent and worth watching. So we start with a unique premise. We hear a little girl whose name we'll find out is Tina, and she's crying, and her father doesn't think much of it. He just gets out of bed to check on her. And when he goes into her room, the little girl is gone, meaning literally gone. He cannot find her no matter how much he searches, although he can hear her voice. Which brings me to one of the two main issues I have with this episode, which is that the voice is obviously an adult's voice trying to sound like a little girl. It really sounds nothing like a child's voice at all. And it's unfortunate because the voice is a very important part of the episode. And it does take you out of the episode just a little bit. It doesn't kill the episode, but it does take you out of it a little bit. So we go past the opening narration and the mother comes into the room. And this woman's pretty crazy and over the top hysterical, which I guess is to be understandable if your little girl is missing. And they're both looking for her. They can't find her. So the father decides to call a friend of his named Bill, who is a physicist, because he can't think of anything else to do. Okay, now there's also a dog that's been barking, and he'll be important in the episode. And he also disappears. And this is because when Bill comes over, he explains that the dog must have sensed what's going on. So, Bill has some theories, but he's not sure yet. So they move the bed, him and the father, and he says that he's looking for an opening to something, but he's not sure what yet. So he feels the wall, and all of a sudden his hand goes through the wall, and he explains that the little girl Tina must have fallen out of bed and gone through this, wall, which is like some kind of portal to another dimension. Now, this is the other thing about the episode. How they came to this conclusion is quickly like, oh, somebody's just in another dimension is kind of hard to believe. But if you just go with it, it's fine. It works in the episode. So then we get a lot of explanation, which I'm not going to go into all of it. But Bill basically explains, how these dimensions work. And it's all very interesting. It does feel a little exposition heavy, but I think in the context of the episode and the time period that it was made, it's fine. I can't really think of a better way they could have done this. So he explains a lot about how the dimensions work, and the mother interrupts this after a while, hysterically again, saying she can't hear Tina anymore. So they all go around and search to try and hear her again. And eventually Bill does. He finds her voice, and he also hears the dog. So he comes up with a good idea. He says, draw the dog towards us and tell the little girl Tina to follow, and maybe he'll lead her out. But this doesn't really work, as they can't really get her out of there. So the father winds up putting his hand in the wall against the advice of Bill, who's worried about this, although he doesn't tell us why yet. And he actually does fall in or is sucked in. I'm not really sure, but he winds up inside the dimension in the wall on the other side. And this part's really cool. There's some weird special effects and camera angles. It even appears that the characters are upside down at one point. And this goes on for a while, but it doesn't really feel long or boring. It's actually very, very interesting. And like I said, it goes on for a while. The father keeps calling out to the little girl Tina, and eventually the dog does bring Tina to him, and Bill pulls him out. So they all get out, so we get a happy ending, and the mother takes Tina into another room, the little girl who seems to be upset. And then Bill explains, I had a hold of you the whole time, but I was worried about you going in there because the dimension is slowly closing up. And you could have had half of you stuck inside that dimension and half of you here. And they don't go into that anymore, but that's a little creepy and disturbing, and I'm not really sure how that would work. But they don't go into it any further from there. And Rod Serling gives his closing narration about the Twilight Zone. So a very effective and very different episode. No other episode has really touched on this exactly yet. They've done things, with other dimensions, but never in this regard or manner, and it's just a very interesting, well-made episode. The acting is pretty good overall. The direction is really good, and Richard Matheson writes another compelling script. Like I said, the big problem is the voice, but if you can just look beyond the obvious adult voice, which is unfortunate. I'm not really sure why they had to do that, but if you can look beyond that, this is an episode well worth watching, and I would give Little Girl Lost a 4 out of 5. So a 4 out of 5 for Little Girl Lost. I do consider this to be a must-see episode at least once. It's an essential Twilight Zone. And as always, thank you very much for watching.